Is the left pushing dangerous precedents that could put all Americans at risk? Today, we're diving deep into a heated debate where a Democrat defends illegal immigrants, even those with criminal ties, over the safety of American citizens. Well, Kaine calls out this dangerous narrative, and the Supreme Court's ruling just made things even more explosive. Stick around, because the truth behind this debate might shock you.
Hey y'all, and welcome to Politibrawl. My name is Brian, and Will Kaine completely exposes this insane Democrat for prioritizing illegal immigrants over American citizens. Let's dive in.
Forgive me for 1 second. The point is, he's not anyone. He's not an average American citizen. He's not someone watching from home. He is an illegal alien. He is an alleged gang member of a foreign terrorist designated organization, and he was ordered removed. That would seem a level of elements of due process certainly distinguishes him from the average American citizen, and you are making a very scary argument to Americans today. You are suggesting to Americans, if he can remove this man, the details of which we just walked through, you're suggesting he can remove you. And that seems a pretty far cry from reality.
It is not a far cry from reality. And I do have to say something. You know, I born and raised Southern Baptist, and I don't think anyone is nobody, number one. But number two, he did not have due process. He was given a protective status. And the fact of the matter is that Donald Trump talked about doing the same thing to U.S. citizens just about less than a week ago. And that should concern people. I'm not here to litigate the man specifically. He can come back to the United States and go through the process. That's what we want to happen. But that's not what's going on. And you want to talk about courts. Wait, hold on. You want to talk about courts, but the highest court in the land told Donald Trump what to do: facilitate him coming back to the country. And guess what they did? They flipped the bird to the Supreme Court. That's not the rule of law. And so we should all be.
I've heard you make that argument, and I've heard Senator Van Hollen make that argument, that you're all of a sudden very dedicated to due process, and you're all of a sudden very dedicated to the legitimacy of decisions made by the Supreme Court of the United States.
And
it's all
you're saying all of a
I feel, yeah, I feel like, Congressman, I feel like 10 months. Excuse me.
Even for people I disagree with, and that's the difference between us.
Excuse me. I feel like, personally, we'll let the audience decide, if 10 months is relatively recently to be an adoptee of the legitimacy of the courts. Because on July 1st of 2024, you posted on your website the following. It's up right now if anyone wants to go to your website. Our country and the world will now recognize this day as the day the Supreme Court of the United States effectively became an illegitimate, politically corrupt arm of the conservative right wing. That's when the Supreme Court of the United States ruled that Donald Trump had immunity from prosecution. And on that day, 10 months ago, you called the Supreme Court of the United States illegitimate. Here today, all of a sudden, you seem to be very dedicated, principled, in fact, to the simple rules of law, due process, and legitimacy of the court.
I still hold that the Supreme Court is very much skewed to the right and that there is corruption on the court. I do hold that today. But the fact that the court is so skewed to the right, and even then, they're still saying a complete decision, unanimous decision, that he needs to be brought home, shows that this shouldn't be a partisan issue. It should be a thing that Democrats, Republicans, everybody are coming behind. Bring the guy home so he can go through due process. That is what the Supreme Court, the conservative-leaning Supreme Court, said.
Congressman, from this vantage point, respectfully.
Hey y'all, and welcome to Poll It. I'm Brian, and today we're diving into a tense back and forth where Will Kaine fiercely criticizes a Democrat for defending what he sees as a dangerous precedent, putting illegal immigrants above American citizens. Kaine highlights a specific case involving a man he describes as an illegal alien, allegedly affiliated with a terrorist-designated gang, who had already received a removal order. Kaine argues this isn't just a matter of immigration but national security, emphasizing that due process was followed and that this individual clearly differs from the average American. He accuses the Democrat of making a frightening argument to the public by implying that if the government can deport this man, it could come for anyone, an idea Kaine rejects as misleading and inflammatory. In response, the Democrat pushes back strongly, asserting that no one should be considered nobody, and pointing out that the man had been granted protective status. He warns that former President Donald Trump has recently floated the idea of similar actions against U.S. citizens, which he believes is the real threat Americans should be worried about. The exchange underscores the growing divide over immigration, due process, and the boundaries of executive power. In a heated exchange, the speaker argues that the man in question should be allowed to return to the United States and go through the proper legal process, insisting that's the fair and lawful path forward. However, he claims that's not what's happening, pointing to the Trump administration allegedly defying a Supreme Court order to facilitate the man's return, a move he says blatantly disregards the rule of law. As the discussion escalates, the other speaker pushes back, highlighting what they see as selective respect for due process and the courts. They note that while the speaker and others, like Senator Van Hollen, are suddenly championing the legitimacy of the Supreme Court, just months earlier, on July 1, 2024, the same speaker posted on their website that the court had become an illegitimate, politically corrupt arm of the conservative right wing, after it ruled Donald Trump had immunity from prosecution. The back and forth exposes a deep divide over the consistent application of legal principles, institutional trust, and political hypocrisy. The speaker confronts the other individual, pointing out the contradiction between their previous stance and current argument. He reminds them that
if you haven't always been dedicated to these principles, if you in fact have called the Supreme Court of the United States illegitimate very recently, and if you can acknowledge that Abrego Garcia is not your average American citizen, and his circumstances are not anyone watching that is ready to be deported from the United States, from this vantage point, respectfully, it appears as though your trip to El Salvador is less about principle and even less about Abrego Garcia and more about grandstanding and fear-mongering American citizens in a continuing narrative that casts yourself as a hero in this melodrama and the villain as Donald Trump.
Folks, you just saw full delusion in human form. Okay, this leftist, who has apparently been able to go down to El Salvador and try to facilitate the release of an illegal migrant who came from El Salvador back before Bukele, cleaned up the country, and now he's down there trying to score brownie points for rich white liberals, and he's saying this nonsense. The Supreme Court is right-wing? I'm sorry. I'm sorry here. The U.S. Constitution. What part of this is right-wing, okay? What part of the U.S. Constitution, which literally states what the Supreme Court can do, what Congress can do, and what the president can do, the founding document that makes our government work, what part of that in the Supreme Court is right-wing? Oh, I'm sorry. Is this a reaction to the Warren Court getting everything wrong for about 20 some odd years and then making the U.S. an absolute litigation nightmare that it is today? Thank you, by the way, left wing. That was a wonderful way to interpret the Constitution by basically saying that it didn't mean squat. Okay? This dude right here is trying to talk about due process when the entire point of the left is to tear down, transform, and destroy any single part of the U.S. Constitution, of Western civilization. Anything they can get their hands on, they will try to get their fingers in, rip it out, and destroy it, and leave nothing in its wake other than Marxist nonsense. This dude, this is Maxwell Frost, by the way, and he represents the 10th Congressional District of Florida. And that 10th Congressional District basically is for snowbirds. Okay, that's where all the Yankees move to once they realize that, oh, we have ruined all of New England, we've ruined New York City, we've ruined upstate New York, we've ruined parts of Pennsylvania, let's all move down to Florida. That has had Republican control for basically longer than I've been alive. All right, they switched over faster than the majority of southern states did, and they have turned it into an absolute paradise. Okay, Walt Disney was not joking when he decided to buy up land just outside of Orlando and made Disney World. This dude should be talking about Epic Universe and their new reveals. He should be talking about the Disney dining plan. This dude should not be talking about human rights because the majority of people from his district don't know that from their... This dude doesn't know what he's talking about. Okay? It is as simple as that. This dude is screaming about due process when less than a year ago, he was also screaming that the Supreme Court looked at the Constitution and said, hey, the President of the United States is allowed certain freedoms and abilities in order to carry out his jobs according to this document. And this dude was whining about this. The reality is, rich white liberals vote for people like this. All right, this dude's 28. He's younger than I am. Rich white liberals want this sort of nonsense because they want their utopian ideals finally revealed. The reality is, their utopia becomes a dystopia the moment they get power. Remember the Biden years? Remember when we had to deal with parents who were screaming at their school boards for putting woke nonsense into their child's minds? Then remember the fact that the FBI, under the Biden administration, put said parents on a watch list. Remember when you railed against abortion because it violates the very idea of the right to life? Guess what? You were on a watch list under the Biden administration. Okay? This is what happens when leftists get power. They will rat out their neighbors, they will destroy their neighborhoods, all for the sake of their utopian ideals because their brains have completely rotted out. Ronald Reagan basically summed this up over 40 years ago. Liberals just know so much that isn't so. These people are not based in reality. This dude is out here simping for Abreu Garcia. This dude has had alleged ties to MS-13 that was confirmed by 2 different immigration judges. This dude was then correctly sent to El Salvador, and they're mad. The left wing is mad because a paperwork process wasn't fully filed out. Then the Supreme Court said, the lower court can't exactly tell what the president can and can't do, but this dude should be brought back. The president should try his best to get him back. Well, guess what? Donald Trump quite literally talked with President Bukele, where Abreu Garcia is from, the president of El Salvador, and the president of El Salvador simply said, no, we are not releasing someone with alleged MS-13 ties back on the streets. That dude, okay, a man who is president of another country, cares more about the United States than Maxwell Frost does, than his ridiculous cronies do. These people decided to use their time off from Congress to go down to El Salvador and basically realize the hard way, oh, the American people want illegal immigrants off the streets. They want MS-13 members off the streets. People who live in Aurora, Colorado, they want MS-13 members off the streets. Left-wing, rich white liberals do not live in reality. And they voted for this nonsense, and Will Kaine correctly calls him out on this ridiculous amount of tripe and nonsense. Man, the amount of brain rot you have to be to not only look at this man and believe him as gospel, but then think that what he has to say holds any value? This is beyond bless your hearts, people. This is a problem. Folks, my name is Brian. Hope you enjoyed that segment here on Politibrawl. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Catch you on the next one. And until then, y'all have a good one.
10 months ago, they called the Supreme Court illegitimate and criticized its political bias. Now, however, they seem to suddenly champion the court's legitimacy, due process, and the rule of law. The speaker maintains that while they still believe the Supreme Court is skewed to the right and corrupt, the court's unanimous decision that the individual in question should be brought back to the U.S. highlights that this issue should not be partisan. They argue that both Democrats and Republicans should unite behind the simple principle of bringing the person home so he can undergo due process, emphasizing that this is what the Supreme Court has ruled. The speaker addresses the congressman, pointing out that despite recent claims of dedication to principles like due process, the congressman has previously called the Supreme Court illegitimate, which undermines his credibility. They then acknowledge that Abreu Garcia's situation is far from typical, highlighting that his case is not one that most Americans would relate to, especially in the context of deportation. From this perspective, The speaker argues that the congressman's trip to El Salvador seems more about political grandstanding than genuine concern for Garcia's situation, suggesting that it's an attempt to cast himself as a hero while framing Donald Trump as the villain in an ongoing narrative. The speaker then critiques this as a form of fear-mongering and a melodramatic display that distracts from the real issues at hand, calling the congressman's actions full delusion in human form. The speaker fiercely criticizes the congressman's stance, accusing him of trying to gain favor with wealthy liberals by making misleading statements about the Supreme Court. He points out that the congressman's claim about the court being right-wing is absurd, especially when considering the U.S. Constitution itself, which clearly outlines the roles of the Supreme Court, Congress, and the President. The speaker argues that the Constitution, as the foundational document of the United States, is not inherently right-wing. Instead, he suggests that the congressman's criticism stems from a reaction to the Warren Court, which he claims made countless errors for decades and turned the U.S. legal system into a litigation nightmare. He then sharply accuses the left of attempting to dismantle and distort the Constitution's original meaning, arguing that their approach to due process is part of a broader agenda to tear down the very framework that has made the country work. The speaker passionately criticizes Congressman Maxwell Frost, accusing him of being part of a broader effort to dismantle Western civilization and replace it with Marxist nonsense. The speaker mocks Frost's stance, claiming that his district, Florida's 10th, is populated by snowbirds, people who moved to Florida after they ruined parts of the Northeast, like New York and New England. The speaker praises Florida's long-standing Republican control, claiming the state has flourished under conservative leadership, contrasting it with the political failings of northern states. He sarcastically suggests that Frost should focus on more relevant topics for his district, like Disney World, instead of speaking about human rights, which he argues is outside of Frost's understanding. The speaker also points out the hypocrisy of Frost advocating for due process when just months earlier he was criticizing it, emphasizing that the congressman doesn't know what he's talking about. The speaker criticizes the left, particularly rich white liberals, for supporting figures like Congressman Maxwell Frost, claiming they vote for him because they want to see their utopian ideals implemented. He argues that these ideals turn into a dystopia the moment left